In my previous video, global environmental problems were listed, and now we will be talking in detail about some most important environmental problems. And first environmental problem which we think about is climate change or global warming or greenhouse effect. Usually we use these three terms even interchangeably, although they do not mean the same. So let's start with the term greenhouse effect. Greenhouse effect describes the phenomenon when the radiation can go through certain surface like Earth atmosphere or glass in a greenhouse, but it cannot get out. So some percentage of radiation is retained in the atmosphere and cannot go out. And this phenomenon is positive for the Earth. Without greenhouse effect, the life as we know, the life on Earth we know, would not be able to exist. So we are not worried about the greenhouse effect. What we are worried about is the intensification, the enhancement of greenhouse effect. Greenhouse effect is getting stronger and stronger due to greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases are the following: carbon dioxide, which is CO2, methane, which is CH4, nitrous oxide, which is N2O, and difluoromethane, which is like methane, where two hydrogen atoms were substituted by chlorine and two were substituted by fluorine. And this is also called CFC, which means chlorofluorocarbon, or trade name is Freon 12. These gases are included into the Kyoto Protocol. I will tell you later about that. Obviously, water vapor is also greenhouse gas, but obviously humans cannot diminish the amount of water vapor because water is essential for our survival. So the problem is these previous four gases. The problem of Freon 12 has been disappearing because Freon 12 was made by humans, so it is totally artificial, and it was used in refrigerators and also deodorants, but it was replaced with other substances. So the problem of Freon is diminishing. Freon is also responsible for the ozone hole, and we were talking in the previous lecture about that. Nitrous oxides, or general nitrous oxide, appears always when we have burning. Nitrogen and oxygen in, let's say, room temperature, very general term, room temperature, normally does not react. Nitrogen does not react with oxygen in lower temperatures. But in very high temperature of burning, when something is burning, various oxides of nitrogen appear, and one of them is nitrous oxide, which is 2 atoms of nitrogen and 1 atom of oxygen. Methane is produced by animal production, mainly. Animal production. That's why there is recommendation for eating less meat, because animals like cows produce methane, which is greenhouse gas. And carbon dioxide in any process of burning is obviously produced, and this is the highest amount among the gases, greenhouse gases, which are produced at least partially by humans. And why are we worried about the greenhouse effect, or not greenhouse effect, as I told you, but the intensification of greenhouse effect? Because when there are more gases in the atmosphere, then atmosphere is getting warmer. And so we have the second term, global warming. The fact is that the temperature is growing. The temperature on Earth is growing. And the question is not if it's growing, but the question is what is the human contribution in global warming? How much it depends on humans. And here is a graph, and we will see the amount of greenhouse gases here in various times of in various periods of human history. So what can we see here? We can see greenhouse gases and the dynamics of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere since 1850 till 2000. And we can see that obviously there were fluctuations. It was not linear, but you can see that in the second half of 20th century, the carbon dioxide increased, and methane also increased, although just before 2000 there was decrease, and freons did not exist earlier, so they were increasing, but then they decreased dramatically due to the limitations and ban of freons. So we can observe the growth of greenhouse gases, and we can observe the growth of temperature. So this indicates that the global warming is, if not human-made completely, humans have their contribution to global warming. And the question is whether they can do anything about that, whether it's possible to diminish global warming, and whether it's worth doing. This is the question, which is not a trivial question, although it looks very trivial. The opponents of theory that human contribution to global warming is that big is that in the past, where there was no industry, we had also periods of very warm climate, but we had also ice age. So when the ice age ended, there were two periods of Holocene climate optimum, and this was in prehistoric times, so it was 8,000 to 6,000 years ago. Second Holocene climate optimum was 5,000 years ago, and it lasted more than 1,000 years. And then we had colder climate, and then Minoan warming, from Minos, the legendary king of Greek island Crete. And then we had Bronze Age cooling, and again Roman warming. So during Roman times it was warmer, and then in the 5th century, our date, we had mass migrations of people, and these migrations were caused by colder weather, which made worse, the weather conditions became worse, and people tried to look for better pastures. And then medieval warming, and since 15th century there was Little Ice Age, and it lasted through 17th century and till 19th century. And in 20th century the temperatures again are rising, and we can believe, it's a serious argument to believe that this time the temperature rise is caused by humans, because the sun activity is not higher than it used to be. So especially in recent times, it is reasonable to think that global warming is human caused, or that human contribution is high. Another question we have to answer is whether global warming is necessarily bad thing, because in a country like Poland, global warming means that we will be able to grow some plants which which could not grow so far. So we will be more effective in agriculture. The answer is not that simple, because obviously in other countries there will be even hotter weather than it is. So in the countries of Africa, Asia, there will be droughts. And also the effect of rising temperature can be, or will be, melting the ice caps on the poles. Obviously not all the ice will melt, but much more ice will melt, which will cause the rise of the sea level. And also these changes can also cause not necessarily warmer weather everywhere, because when ice melts, some areas can be paradoxically colder, like the area of Iceland, for example, where there is Gulf Stream, and when ice melts, this Gulf Stream will not go the same way as it goes. It will be colder, so it is possible that in some areas it won't be warmer, it will be colder, in fact. So we come to the last term, because I told you there were 3 terms, and the last term is climatic change. The term climatic change is more general, because it does not necessarily mean warming. It also means higher incidence of extreme weather phenomena. So it will be also dangerous. So the answer, should we worry about the effect of global warming? And the answer is, unfortunately, yes. Obviously, in experimental sciences, we can never be 100% sure. So there are people who say that, okay, it's very likely that there will be adverse effects of global warming or climatic changes, but it is not for sure. It might be likely, but it is not 100% sure. So what if it turns out that the scientists, or most of scientists, are wrong? And the answer is, usually the answer given is that the changes which are proposed will bring positive effects anyway. So even if the global warming was not the case, which is unlikely, but even if there would be clean air, there would be independence in using energy sources. We will not rely on fossil fuels, and so on and so on. But the answer is not that simple, because there is a problem with economic vitality. So the economy that is proposed would turn out to cause recession. Well, now we are facing recession because of the pandemic. And because of that, in many countries, including Poland, there are some measures which effectively mean less energy use. Well, apart from one change, which is that we are now encouraged to use our own cars rather than public transport, which in normal circumstances was the opposite. And the dream of climatic activists not to use aeroplanes came through now. So the many flights were called off, and people are not going for holidays. So the situation in many cases is perfect from the point of view of so-called carbon print. Nevertheless, this situation cannot last forever, because it will cause very deep recession. So there is an experiment now which we are going through involuntarily, and we can look at the effects of this global experiment on reducing human activities. Okay, I am being a little bit sarcastic. Nevertheless, some people say that there is another option to prevent adverse effects of the climatic change, which is adaptation to climatic changes, which is a little bit controversial because it will cost money. It will also demand using more energy, but it will preserve us keeping our lifestyle. So this option is building dams to prevent floods, also introducing air conditioning, or building passive houses, which where air conditioning is natural and it's more effective. So, well, actually this would be in both approaches. So the approach reducing carbon print would also accept passive houses, and adaptation to climatic changes. Adaptation to climatic changes will also accept this approach. So there can be some compromise between reducing the energy use, reducing fossil fuels, and adaptation to climatic changes through certain measures which will prevent from bad effects of floods or heat or other unpleasant circumstances. I'm not going to answer you which approach is better. Judge for yourself. And now I would like to finish the lecture and have a good time, and well, stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you for your attention.